His face still appears to me in dreams. Deep wrinkles, serene look, as if he knew something I didn't. When I closed the door that afternoon, I did not imagine it would be the last time I would see Walter Higgins, and that his last words would be a riddle that haunts me to this day. I was there. I saw. I felt. The day dawned with almost palpable serenity, the kind of calm that sets in before an invisible change in the air. Walter, my neighbor, and, in a way, my friend, was a constant figure in my life. His presence was a silent comfort, an anchor in time. He was always there at the end of the corridor, where silence seemed thicker, as if time hesitated. Walter was a war veteran, but rarely mentioned his past. His eyes, however, told stories that their words did not dare unveil. There was a depth of them, a shadow that seemed to dance gently as he looked through the window of his apartment. He wore a gray beret, a blue sweater that seemed to have been part of it forever, and his floor was slow, but determined, as if each step were a reaffirmation of his presence in the world. Each morning I was in the condominium garden. He sat on the weather-worn wooden bench, a silent monument to the passing years. On the day in question, the scene was the same. I approached, feeling the freshness of the morning air, an aroma of newly opened flowers mixed with the coffee that brought in a thermal glass. Walter was there, looking lost on the horizon, contemplating something that only he could see. "Good morning, Walter," I said, giving him a smile and a green apple, his favorite. He accepted with a nod, a small but gratitude gesture. We didn't need words to communicate. There was a tacit understanding between us, a friendship built on the simplicity of daily gestures. During these morning meetings, our conversations were brief, but significant. Walter didn't talk much about himself. He would rather hear. He had a special ability to ask questions that revealed more about us than we perceived ourselves. Today, however, he was especially silent, more introspective. Its fingers traced invisible standards on the surface of the wooden table beside it. "Are you okay, Walter?" I asked, trying to break the barrier of silence that had settled between us. He looked up, his eyes finding mine. There was a sadness there, something deep and immeasurable. "I'm fine," he answered, finally, his low and hoarse voice carrying the weight of 1,000 unlisted stories. The morning continued with the same placidity. The sun climbed into the sky, throwing long shadows around the garden, and I said goodbye to Walter, promising to come back later to help with his shopping. When I walked away, I felt a shiver, a feeling that something was about to change, but I couldn't identify what. Looking back, to that moment in the garden, I realized how it all seemed so normal, so insignificant. However, there was a strange calm, a stillness that I now recognize as the prelude to something larger. At that moment, Walter was just a silent neighbor, but soon he would become the center of a mystery that I could never have predicted. Little did I know that this would be the last day that he would see him sitting on that bench, looking at the horizon with his wise and enigmatic eyes. I was there. I saw. I felt. The sun was already tall when Walter, with its lightly tilted gray beret to the side, called me back, interrupting the path I made toward my apartment. "You're a minute?" he asked, and instantly I felt that something had changed. There was a peculiar quality in his voice, a mixture of urgency and an almost disconcerting calm. It was as if he was trying to contain a storm inside him, keeping his surface quiet, but with restless waves below. I sat next to him, the wooden bench grinding under the weight of our unlisted stories. Walter handed me a brown envelope, his hands slightly shaky, which was not common in him. The texture of the paper was rough against my fingers, and the object seemed to weigh more than it should. "If I don't come back tomorrow, burn it. Don't open it, promise?" he asked, his fixed eyes on mine, looking for a silent promise. I agreed, a little hesitant, but I did it. At that moment, I did not realize the depth of what I was being entrusted to me. I thought it was some personal document, perhaps related to his family, or the times he preferred not to mention. There was a solemnity in his request that moved me, a seriousness that I could not ignore. He trusted me to maintain his secret, and I, no matter how curiously I was, respected his desire. In the following minutes, the silence between us was dense, loaded with unnamed meanings. Walter looked at the horizon with a look that it realizes crossing time and space. It was as if he was saying goodbye to something, or someone. I wanted to ask more. I wanted to understand why that urgency, but something in your expression contained me. There was a request for respect there, to let that moment remain in his own sphere of mystery. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice almost a whisper taken by the wind. "You are a good friend." These simple and true words echoed in my mind long after he stood up, straightening the blue sweater as preparing for a journey. I watched as he walked away, his slow but resolute walk. Every step reminds the weight of the story he carried. That afternoon, his image walking away remained vivid in my mind. The envelope, now kept carefully in my drawer, seemed to be pulsate with a secret that I should not unravel. I wondered what it could be in it, what unprecedented stories could be waiting between those leaves. But the promise I made to Walter was a pact that I would honor, despite the curiosity I throbbed in my veins. As the day unfolded, a sense of restlessness began to settle in my chest. Walter's request, though simple, was a constant reminder that something was about to change, even though I didn't know how or why. The shadows lengthened in the garden, and the silence that followed his request became almost deafening. I did not know. But that was the prelude of an absence that would leave marks in my life, an absence that I would only begin to understand the next day. That night I lay with the thought that everything could be different the next morning. There was an expectation in the air, a tension that seemed to grow with each clock beat. I waited. I called the sleep, but he was evasive. The memory of Walter's eyes, that last exchange of looks, didn't leave me. Somewhere inside me, I already knew that tomorrow would bring answers that I was not ready to face. I was there, not knowing that this would be Walter's last request, a silent farewell that I would never forget. I was there. I saw. I felt. At that moment, the world seemed to stop. His fingers, firm on my arm, conveyed an urgency that contrasted with the serenity of his voice. "Sometimes we need to disappear to continue existing." The depth of these words reverberated inside me, like a stone thrown into quiet waters, creating waves that spread through my being. Walter released my hand and, with one last look, began to move away, every step of him like a measure marking the time that seemed to stretch around us. It was as if he was walking out of the world I knew, leaving an invisible trail of mystery and absence. Its curved back, the slightly sloping gray beret, the blue sweater contrasting with the sky that was beginning to fill with clouds, everything was impregnated with a silent farewell. I was still, unable to move, as he crossed the garden toward the building, his figure slowly being swallowed by the shadow of the entrance. The phrase he had pronounced echoed in my mind, every word gaining weight, based on my heart, with a gravity that I could not explain. Disappear to continue existing. What did he mean by that? It was a puzzle that curled into my thoughts, refusing to be unraveled. Finally, I forced myself out of that suspension state and returned to my apartment. The sense of normality seemed to have been torn from my day. Everything around me seemed slightly out of focus, as if the world was readjusted to a new reality, one where Walter no longer part of visible daily life. I felt like a castaway, clinging to the memories of our last conversation, trying to understand what he was trying to tell me. The night fell quietly, bringing with it a sense of restlessness. My mind kept revisiting that moment, Walter's words coupling like an incessant echo. I tried to find meaning, a logic that could explain why he had said that, but all I found was more questions. What did it mean to disappear? What kind of existence did he look away from everything we knew? The dawn advanced without me finding rest. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, a sad song that seemed to accompany Walter's thoughts. In my mind, his figure walking away remained vivid, every detail tattooed in my memory. The silence of his absence was already beginning to make himself feel, a ghostly presence that filled the space left by him. Finally, sleep took me, but it was a busy sleep, populated by fragmented dreams and images of a Walter that smiled enigmatically when saying goodbye. I woke up early, with Cora heavy tie-in and an anxiety that could not explain. I looked out the window, hoping to see him in the garden, as usual, but the bench was empty, a silent reminder of his absence. The morning was cold and gray, reflecting the uncertainty that hovered in my spirit. I was there. I saw. I felt. And now, all that was left was the absence of Walter, an absence that spoke louder than any presence. That day, while the world around me was going ahead, I felt that something fundamental had changed. His words continued to haunt me, a mystery that I needed to unravel. because somehow I knew the key to understanding its disappearance was in that sentence, a puzzle that would lead me to truths I was not yet prepared to face. I was there. I saw. I felt. The next morning, the air carried a strange stillness, an almost tangible suspension, as if time hesitated to move forward. I walked down the hall of the building, each step echoing gently on the walls, and noticed something that made my heart accelerate. The door of Walter's apartment was ajar. A vision that seemed wrong, displaced. He has always been meticulous with his things, especially with the safety of his home. I stopped at the hesitant door. The world around me seemed to be compressed, focusing on that narrow van that let the apartment inside. I called Walter, my voice hanging in the air unanswered. A deep silence followed, a silence that seemed to contain suspended breaths, waiting not expressed. I pushed the door gently, feeling the resistance of the air, as if the space itself refused to reveal what I was about to discover. Inside, everything seemed normal at first glance, like a frozen scenario in time. The cup of coffee was resting on the table. Its content is very cold. The journal of the day was open in the news section, the words printed as a promise of continuity that did not materialize. Walter's coat was hanging in the hanger, a familiar presence that now seemed strangely desolate. Every detail, every object, was a silent testimony of a life that had somehow paused. My eyes landed on the wristwatch over the dresser. It was an old, robust watch, one of those who seemed to have lived as much as its owner. He marked 10:10. The real estate handles in his own testimony of time stopped. I took it, feeling the cold weight of the metal, a tangible link with someone who was now absent. That absence was palpable, a shadow that seemed to fill every corner of the apartment. I sat on the couch, trying to soothe the scene before me. Walter's absence was a silent cry that reverberated on the walls, an absence that transformed each object known into a riddle. What would have happened? Why had he left everything like that, as if he had only gone to a walk and would soon return? I called the police, my voice cheating on the anxiety I was trying to contain. I explained the situation, every detail carefully reported. However, with no signs of breaking or fighting, the answer was cold, bureaucratic. Probably went out to visit someone, they told me, as if that were a sufficient justification for the restlessness I felt. But I knew it wasn't typical of him to leave things that way, and something inside me refused to accept that simplistic explanation. I hung up the phone, feeling even more. The reality of his absence was beginning to root in me, every second that was reinforcing the certainty that something was terribly wrong. I looked around, looking for clues, fragments of some response hidden between the shadows of the apartment. Every moment that passed made me realize the loss more deeply, the gap that opened in the daily plot. I was there. I saw. I felt. And at that moment, I realized that Walter's absence was not just physical. It was a mystery that intertwined with the very essence of its existence, a puzzle that I had the responsibility to unravel. Something told me that it was not just a temporary absence, but the beginning of a search that would test the limits of my understanding and resilience. And so, with a heavy heart of uncertainty, I prepared to face the unknown, determined to discover the truth behind that disappearance. Because I knew, more than anything, the key to understanding all this was there, hidden between the shadows of an apartment that was no longer the same. I was there. I saw. I felt. The envelope was resting on my table, an incessant reminder of the mystery that Walter had left behind. 3 days have passed since he disappeared, and the weight of his absence seemed to grow every moment, like a shadow that expanded over time. His words still echoed in my mind, a puzzle that I couldn't unravel. And there I was, arrested between the promise of not opening the envelope and the almost visceral need to understand. The nights were the worst. Darkness brought with it a stillness that amplified my anxiety, every tic-tac of the clock a reminder of the time passing without answers. The envelope called for me, his silent presence a challenge to my promise. I would catch him, feeling the texture of the paper under my fingers, trying to imagine what could be inside. What secret Walter had trusted me, so important that it required to be burned if he didn't come back. On the third night, a storm slaughtered over the city, thunder echoing as omens in the night sky. The rain was hitting hard against the windows, an incessant pace that seemed to amplify my restlessness. It was as if the world outside reflected turbulence within me. I sat at the table, the envelope before me, and finally, Curiosity won. I needed to know. I needed to understand what was behind that disappearance. With trembling fingers, I tore the end of the envelope, each fiber of the paper giving in with a sound that seemed louder than it was. Inside, I found a single black and white photograph. It was Walter, younger, his unmistakable face, but without the wrinkles of wisdom that time had sculpted him. It was next to two men I didn't recognize, their unavailable features in the aged image. They were in an unknown scenario, something that resembled a military field or a base, with stalls in the background and old parked vehicles. I turned the picture, and on the verse, there was an inscription. "If they ask, say you never saw me." The words, written by hand, were firm, but they carried a weight that it was impossible to ignore. Who were them, and why did Walter need me to lie about having seen him? The photograph, so simple in its appearance, carried a world of questions, each more disturbing than the previous one. What had happened in Walter's past? Who were those men by his side? And why had he kept this photograph for so long? As I looked at the image, the feeling that I was plunging into something much larger than I intensified. It was as if Walter, even absent, was leading me on a path that he himself had not been able to walk to the end. The dawn dragged on, and I found myself rolling memories of our conversations, looking for any clue I could have ignored. Walter was running away from something or someone. The idea that he was in danger, or that he had done something that had put him in such a situation. He didn't leave me. I needed answers, but the only person who could provide them was missing. That night, while the storm roared outside, I felt a transformation. The promise I had made to Walter now seemed a mission. It was not just about burning the envelope or keeping it secret. It was about understanding the unlisted story of a man who had become more than a neighbor. It was about bringing light to a mystery that seemed to have deep roots, perhaps deeper than I was prepared to face. I was there. I saw. I felt. And now, with photography in my hands, I knew I was involved in something that transcended the simple act of friendship. Walter had left me a track, a thread to follow in an attempt to find the truth, and I was determined to follow him, no matter how dark or tortuous the way could be, because deep down I knew this was the way he wanted me to go, and that was the only way to honor the confidence he had deposited in me. I was there. I saw. I felt. The investigation became almost an obsession, a puzzle that I needed to resolve. As the days turned into unanswered nights, I dived deeper and deeper into Walter's shadows. The world around me seemed to fade as I focused on the task of understanding the invisible connections he had left behind. The photograph, which initially seemed to be just a memory fragment, proved to be a portal to a world of secrets and hidden events. I spent hours in front of the computer, searching names, checking old files and time-yellowish news. The discovery that one of the men next to Walter had disappeared in the 1980s was like a key that unlocked a door to a mysteries maze. The other man, whose death in 1994 was involved in suspicions, was a vital piece in this puzzle. As slowly unveiled the details, a pattern began to emerge, a conductive thread that connected these men to a more complex plot. The dates, all on the 14th of different months, were like a macabre signature, a time marking that seemed to imply something deeper. Walter had also disappeared on the 14th, and this disturbing coincidence could not be ignored. It was as if time had created a cycle, vicious, a loop of events that was repeated with scary accuracy. My mind boiled with possible theories. Was it a conspiracy? Any kind of covert operation that had gone wrong? A revenge? Or perhaps a curse? A past debt that required to be paid? The questions multiplied, but the answers remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of oblivion. I decided I needed more than assumptions. I needed proof, something tangible that could guide me the right way. I started looking for any connection between men in the photo and Walter. I visited files, libraries, even places they could have frequented. Each track, each fragment of information, was a step on the stairs that carried me deeper and deeper into the rabbit. It was during one of these searches that I found something that made my heart skip. An old newspaper article talked about a military operation in the 1970s, a confidential project involving secret missions in foreign territories. Although the details were scarce, the mention of the names of the people involved was enough to make me believe I was on the right track. Walter and the other men in the photo were part of this operation, a piece of the puzzle that was beginning to fit in. With this new knowledge, I realized that perhaps Walter was in danger, that his disappearance was not just an escape or chance. Maybe he was hiding, trying to escape from a past that had finally reached him. Or worse, maybe he was paying the price for something that had been done a long time ago, a debt that could not be forgotten. Time seemed to drain between my fingers. With each passing day without answers was an eternity. The sense of urgency increased, a feeling that throbbed with every beat of my heart. Walter had trusted me to unravel his story, to reveal the truth behind his disappearance. I was determined to fulfill this promise, to find the answers he needed so much, and in the process perhaps find the redemption he sought so much. I was there. I saw. I felt. And with each new discovery, every new piece of information was closer to understanding the truth behind Walter's disappearance. The journey was still far from over, but I knew it was on the right track. The shadows of the past began to dissipate, revealing a story of courage, sacrifice, and above all, a desire for freedom that transcends time. And so, with photography always by my side, I continued the search for Walter, determined to bring his legacy to light. Because in the end, I knew this was the only way to honor the memory of a friend who had become an indelible part of my own story. I was there. I saw. I felt. That night, the air around me seemed to be loaded with silent electricity, as if each particle was waiting for an imminent event. As I walked down the hallway of the building, the sound of my steps echoed almost solemnly, resonating on the walls as a reminder of the loneliness I felt since Walter's disappearance. It was late, and the darkness had settled with a weight that seemed to press the shoulders, making each movement a conscious effort. That's when I heard steps, slow, dragged, as if someone were there, behind me, but hesitated to reveal himself. I turned quickly, my heart accelerating with the expectation of seeing a known figure, or perhaps a revealing shadow. But the corridor was empty, filled only by the silence and shadows that danced in the diffuse light of the lamps. What I saw as I turned to the door of my apartment, however, made my heart stop for a moment. There, on the carpet, a ticket, a simple piece of paper, but carried the weight of the inexplicable. I approached with caution, as if the ticket could disappear at any moment, like a dream interrupted by the abrupt awakening. You saw me last, but not for the last time. The words were written with a trembling, uncertain but distinct familiar letter. W.H. Walter. He had been there, or someone wanted me to believe it. I took the paper, feeling the moisture still present, as if it had been left seconds before my arrival. The paper, damp and cold, seemed to be pulsed into my hands, a physical reminder of Walter's presence. My heart hammered in my chest. What did that mean? How could he have been there, while all evidence pointed to a disappearance without trail? Was he watching me behind the mystery curtains he had created? The idea that he was close but still untouchable was both comforting and disturbing. I entered home, locking the door behind me with renewed care. I sat at the table, the ticket in front of me, as if expecting the words and he magically contained revealed additional secrets. The message was enigmatic, almost poetic in its ambiguity. What was Walter trying to tell me? That I would see him again, in any way? That your story was not over yet? The night unfolded in a whirlwind of thoughts. I remembered every detail of the last meetings with Walter. Every word is not said, every look loaded with meaning. Was there anything I had left? A sign that could guide me to a deeper understanding of what he was trying to communicate? The silence of the apartment was almost tangible, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the occasional crack of the wood that settled in the cold of the night. I realized I was in a crossroads, where each choice could lead to dramatically different paths. The ticket was an invitation, a call to continue seeking, not to give up, even when everything seemed lost. The minutes turned into hours, and the dawn arrived with their peculiar stillness. Finally, exhaustion won my anxiety, and fell asleep with the ticket still in hand, as if it could absorb its meaning through touch. And in my dreams, Walter was there, not as an absent figure, but as a living presence, guiding me for shadow and light corridors, whispering secrets that I could not completely understand. I was there. I saw. I felt. And I knew that despite the uncertainty, I had to continue the search. I had to understand what Walter wanted me to see. because somehow I knew the truth was closer than I could imagine, hidden in the halls and shadows of the past. And so the renewed determination grew in my chest as I waited for the next step, the next sign that would guide me closer to the heart of the mystery. Because this was not the last time. Not yet. Not as long as there was hope of answers. I was there. I saw. I felt. And now, even in the face of Walter's extended absence, I feel his presence hovering around me like a shadow that refuses to fade. To this day, he has not been found. His steps, which once echoed in the corridors, were replaced by almost deafening silence, an absence that speaks louder than any presence. The case was filed, another history lost in the records of unresolved disappearances, a number in the midst of so many others that time insists on forgetting. But for me, Walter has never become just a statistic. I keep the photo and envelope as relics of an unresolved mystery, tangible traces of a riddle that continues to haunt me. They are hidden in a place that no one knows, a dark and safe corner, far from curious eyes. Sometimes I sit at night, the silence of the apartment wrapped in shadows, and holds the photo carefully, studying the faces in it, as if they could somehow whisper the answers I seek. Each line, every frozen smile in time, tells a story that I still can't decipher completely. There are days when I think of burning everything, as Walter asked me. I feel the weight of the promise I made to him, a responsibility that sometimes seems heavier than I can endure. But something prevents me, a hesitation, perhaps the hope that these puzzle pieces will still play a role to play, which can still lead me to a resolution, even late. At other times, I believe that this was the intention of Walter all the time, not destroying the evidence, but preserving them until the right time reached. Other times I find myself waiting again to hear his voice in the hallway, that hoarse and familiar tone that brought with him unexpected comfort. I imagine seeing him appear from the dim light, with the inclined gray beret and the blue sweater that seems to be part of it. It is an image that repeats itself in my thoughts, a vision that haunts me and calms at the same time, because deep down, I don't believe he was completely gone. There is something eternal in Walter, an indelible presence that resists time and absence. Sometimes I feel that he is watching me, guiding my steps invisibly. In times of doubt, it is almost like feeling his gaze on me, a feeling that he is still around, waiting for the right time to reveal himself. Perhaps he is waiting to appear, when the world is ready to understand his story, or maybe he is simply waiting to take me together, somewhere where the mysteries become clear, and time is no longer a barrier. While time passes, I keep living between the shadows of an absence that never completely dissipated. I learned to live with this feeling, to accept that some questions may never find answers. However, even if the case is filed, even if the world has followed ahead, I keep the flame of hope alive, because somewhere inside from me, I still believe that Walter has something to say, one last revelation to share. And until this day comes, I will keep waiting, listening to the whisper of the shadows, seeking a sign that he is ready to guide me one last time. I was there. I saw. I felt. But more than that, I am still here, waiting, listening to the echoes of a past that refuses to be silenced. Time may pass, but the truth, however illusional, has a way to emerge from the depths of oblivion. And until then, I will remain vigilant, with the photo and the envelope as silent companions, witnesses of a mystery that has not yet reached its outcome, because somehow I know that our story together hasn't ended yet. Walter, wherever you are, there is still something to show me, and I'll be here, ready to hear. The script is complete.